Well, that is one of those. It's one of those chapters where you're like, some people are going to say this dude's crazy. You know what I mean? Or I don't believe any of this, and that's okay because it's like it's I'm sharing to you what I experienced, and you can explain it away. That's one of the things in writing that the people that help me and coach me continue to say is be authentic, be genuine, and be vulnerable. Like be bold enough to describe what you experience, even if it's crazy. If it sounds crazy to me. When you talk about it and when I think about it, dude, I can see him standing there. I can see those angels. I can hear their voices. I can hear his voice. And it's crazy. It is. I don't know what to tell you. But I would also, one of the reasons I kept that in there, Steve, and maybe soldiers aren't going to think it's crazy. If you've been to war, you've seen evil and you've seen light and you've seen things that you can't describe. When you've been around death a lot, you're going to see something. There's something beyond death. Death is not just the physical shutdown of this machine. Something happens, things move, spirits move, there's energy. So again, with people that have been in very violent situations, people that have seen danger and fear in really high degrees, no one thinks I'm crazy. There ain't a soldier alive that's been to combat that hasn't experienced something like that. So part of my courage was, hey, I'm going to tell my story because I'm telling your story. I'm telling someone else's story who doesn't have the faith background to say, yeah, man, take it or leave it.
Leaders are not born in a womb. They are forged through heat, pressure, and a whole lot of sweat. The Fire Forged Leader podcast serves the audience through exploring leadership at work, in the community, and with the family, using a practical perspective and real-life experiences from the host, Steve Baumgartner, and his guests in The Forge. Now, it's time to enter the Forge with the Fire Forged Leader.
The man that you will see sitting in front of me today goes by the name of Jeff Tiegs, a retired Delta Force operator who draws from over 25 years of combat experience in the United States Army Special Operations, now leveraging those skills in the work of anti-sex trafficking. He holds a master's degree in national security and strategic studies and has had a ton of lived experience as well, with multiple tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. Jeff is also the president of Skull Games, a nonprofit organization he founded, and he utilizes expertise to identify and combat human traffickers globally. But most recently, he is the author of my most recent read, Where Have All the Heroes Gone?, where Jeff does an amazing job correlating his story to stories in the Bible, where he finds meaning in his life and career, and then wrote it in such a way that you're going to find meaning in your life as well. The book is very new, coming out simply 2 months ago, and I have been blessed to read this book. But even more so, blessed that Jeff accepted my invitation to be on the podcast to discuss it.
No, it was Veterans Day. Purposefully put it out on Veterans Day this past November 11th or 10th?
11th.
Yeah,
Yep.
okay. Yeah.
So I bought it right away because we hadn't formally met yet, but I bought it because I knew who you were by the work that you do. So I'm like, okay, I know that this guy's out there doing awesome work. I got to buy this book, check it out. And then was just ecstatic, running circles after I'd read a little bit of it and you had accepted to come on the show. So once again, thank you, Jeff.
No, thank you. We have many friends in common. You come highly recommended. Your integrity and your commitment to excellence on all this stuff. So, it's fun. Whenever people do these intros, it always feels weird. You know what I mean? Because but my wife and I were just talking about this. We both were sick over New Year's, and we're just kind of laying there, and you're thinking back because we were in Seattle visiting my other boy, and I had spent a lot of time at Fort Lewis, and we were reminiscing of those old days. And it's like, when you become an older man, I'm not, I sometimes I say I'm an old man. Sometimes I just say I'm an older man. It's like, dude, you've been there, done that. Like you talk about the military and all these things that I accomplished, or a master's degree or writing a book. And you look in the rearview mirror and it's like that is impressive. But while you're doing it, man, it's a lot of work. You put your head down and you just work and you fail and you get up and you try again and you get knocked down and you get up. So I sometimes like these intros because it makes you feel like, oh, maybe I'm not such a loser. Maybe I have done some things that are worthwhile. You know what I mean?
Oh, for sure. For sure. I do an AAR every day just to,
Really?
yeah, just to realize
Yeah.
what I've actually accomplished because yeah, just like you, right? You put your head down, you work, and you never take a look at everything that you impacted throughout the day, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I tell you, an AAR, an after action review, for people I don't know what that is, that to me is integrated into my prayer life. My morning prayers on God, what do you have in store for me today? Help me do good, and then the evening prayers of, hey, what do I need to tighten up? What I need to do better? So I've never really looked at it that I do an AAR daily as well. It's just kind of integrated into my prayer life. So yeah, I'm gonna be a little bit more intentional about the actual AAR aspect of it.
Well, I like that though because, and we'll get into the book here shortly, but really when you look at it, that's exactly how I would expect you to do an AAR because
Yeah.
that's how you wrote this book. That's how you live your life as your faith is very integral to everything that you do.
Yeah, and it's the book, the writing of the book process, with enough time behind it, I learned a lot of things about myself. Um, some of those I wasn't too proud of. You know what I mean? But I'm glad that I realized them and came to terms with them and can be better about it. So yeah, I was on a podcast a few weeks ago with that comedian Brian Callen. And if you've ever heard of him, if you haven't seen him, look him up. Oh my God, is he funny? I mean, I knew of Brian and I'd seen him, but I just recently started watching his stand up, and he's hilarious, and he's also very very intelligent, very smart, very well read. And he read my book, and he said, I feel like this book is a prayer. It's a long prayer, and man, did he nail it? That the act of writing that book was a prayer. It was, and when I say prayer, I think sometimes maybe people don't understand what I mean by praying, but praying to me is a two-way communication with God. And it isn't necessarily instant, right? Like you send something out there, you ask him a question, you ask him for advice, you say I'm sorry for something, or whatever it is, and it isn't instant. It takes time. And the course of the years of writing that book, it really was just another form of prayer. And like you've just said, an after action review of my life to date and what has been
Right.
impactful, and how do I continue to learn and be better. So yeah, I've got two more ways to describe my book: one as a prayer and one as an after action review on my life to date. So those are, appreciate that.
Continuous learning, right?
Yeah.
So, just so everybody knows who you are, right? I gave a little bit of an intro there, but I couldn't capture the depth and breadth of your military experience. So can you kind of walk some non-military people through what that looks like?
Yeah, I'll go through it real quick. Straight out of high school, I joined the military, and I went to the First Ranger Battalion. So I was a private in the First Ranger Battalion, which is a very difficult way to grow up. I joined the military when I was 17 years old, and I really do credit those NCOs in the Ranger Battalion for really teaching me what it means to be a man. Um, Wonderful parents, wonderful family, but I really solidified who I was in that 5 years of 17 to 22 when I was Ranger. And people know what Rangers are now. They didn't really know what that was back then. It is the premier infantry, light infantry, airborne unit in the United States military. Very, very highly trained, selected group of young men. I did 5 years there, had a break in service because there were other things that I wanted to experiment and check out, and then I ended up coming back in. And when I came back in as an officer, I was enlisted initially, got out as a sergeant. When I came back as an officer, I went back to the Ranger battalions as a lieutenant. So I was a lieutenant and a captain as a Ranger, and then I went into Special Forces. So I really liked the small unit tactics. And so I transitioned from being an infantry officer in the Rangers into a Special Forces detachment commander. Went to 10th Special Forces Group, and then that's when the wars kicked off. I had experienced combat both in Just Cause Panama back in 1989 as a corporal in the Rangers, and then as a sergeant in the Rangers. I went to Desert Storm in Iraq. That was really not a whole lot happened there. Then as a lieutenant and early part of being a captain, it really was just training and preparation. And then once I got to 10th Group, it was on and off to Iraq pretty much until I retired in 2015. So I did a couple years at 10th Group and then went to the unit known as Delta Force, 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. I got there in 2005 and then was largely there on and off until I retired in 2015. So, I had a break for grad school in there. I had a couple different kind of assignments where you move in and out of the building. But by and large, I was working in the capacity there under the unit, or under Joint Special Operations Command until I retired. And I think all of those things that I had learned and been trained and taught, I didn't want to just throw away. That was why I came back in the first place. That break in service, I realized, man, those 5 years that I spent, people poured a lot of knowledge, tactics, leadership styles, development, teamwork, mission accomplishment, focus, planning. I really wanted to share that with other people, and that's how I found myself back in the military. So once I retired, I was able to look and see how we could apply the tactics, the techniques, the procedures, the discipline, the planning against another problem set, and that's sex trafficking. So I've worked in a bunch of different organizations, mostly domestically, with some foreign focus as well, countering sex traffickers and predators and pedophiles across the United States. And we just launched off with Skull Games this past June, our own nonprofit, and we are wholly focused on hunting predators that are exploiting women and children online. So our by, through, and with element, which is what Special Forces does. Special Forces says they work by, through, and with host nation partners. Well, my host nation partners with Skull Games is American law enforcement, with police, detectives, both federal and local. And we just try to get them the information that they need to offer women a path to freedom that are being exploited and arrest these predators. And some of the people that we're working with, Jessica is a survivor of this crime, and she is one of the women that has now come back, and she's a hunter. So we've taught her how to use open source intelligence, and we sit survivors of abuse with intelligence professionals and analysts and facial recognition specialists and law enforcement. We build these teams, these Skull Games task force teams, and we soak cities and counties and states to enable law enforcement to really take action. And it's taking off in an incredible way. But we have a lot more to do in 2024, Steve. I can tell you that.
So it's, I get asked a lot since, as you know, I put together that 12-part series on trafficking and exploitation in America. And I get asked a lot, why there's hundreds of groups out there, right, doing this work. Why aren't they all working on the same things? And my answer is they are, right?
Yeah.
They are. They're all working on it, but there's so many different avenues, right? It's
Yeah.
not that snatch and grab mission that we see on TV all the time, like in the movie Taken and different things like that, right?
Yeah, I there's a couple of things, and I'm going to be a little cynical to start, and then I'm going to be a little bit more gracious. I find it interesting though because what companies are you running? You said you run a couple companies.
Well, I run a little one with my kids. That's a little craft thing, right? Because we're teaching them at home, about finances and stuff. And
Yeah.
then I do a little bit of leadership coaching on the side as well.
Okay. Yeah. So why don't you just coach leadership with other people? Why do you have to have your own business?
That's a good point.
You know what I mean? Like it's
Good point.
it's one of those things I don't understand. It's like nobody goes to Coca-Cola and says, "How come you're not partnering with Pepsi?" Well, we have two different products. Yeah, but they're soda. Yeah, but they're different kinds of soda. Or Nike and Adidas. You know what I mean? So like in the business world, nobody is ever confused why there are different companies doing different things and they're competing, but they're not competing, right? Like there's enough of a market to sell Coca-Cola and Pepsi and 1,000 other drinks, or tennis shoes. So there's enough of a market to have multiple groups and entities looking at this crime of trafficking. And like you said, someone's a Coke, someone's Pepsi, someone's a little Royal Crown, somebody's, somebody's just total garbage. So that's one of the things that I find interesting, and I get it because our COO Ty just said this yesterday. A nonprofit, a 501c3 is only a business structure. It's still a business, So when we talk about nonprofits, people immediately think lack of talent, lack of
Mm,
focus, blah blah blah. You know what I mean? Like no, it's another business model. The model isn't to create revenue for shareholders. It's to create impact, and we
right.
created this thing called a B corporation. You have the C corp and then you have the B corp where people are like, hey, we got to stop just having the bottom line on what it is we're able to sell. We need to be able to create impact. So you have the B corp, the benefit corporation, and that's largely failed also because people can't wrap their minds around, hey, we're not making profits. Our shareholders aren't making the profits we expect, even though we are seeing some benefit impact. So a nonprofit is just a business structure.
Right.
And what I do with Skull Games isn't what another company X, Y, and Z does. So I really want people to be a little bit more kind of aware of what they're even saying. And I get it. We there are many nonprofits that are just kind of hobby, right? Like it's what you do as a hobby. Just like there are a lot of small businesses that are really kind of hobbyist. But Skull Games isn't. And when I got out in 2015, this is my profession, man. This is what I do. This is how I make a living. I could do a lot of different things, but this is
Oh
this
yeah.
is how I make a living. And then the next thing is everyone wants to judge how much you make. You know what I mean? Like a
Sure.
like a nonprofit CEO who makes $150,000 a year, and people want to judge that. And I get once again, I get it. If it's misuse of funds, if you're taking all of your money and paying yourself, but there are times, and the time is right now. I don't have a paycheck. I'm not bringing in a paycheck because we are still trying to get Skull Games into that flywheel motion of working through. So one, I think the question is a terrible question, and I think it's ill
Right.
thought out. And then two, where I'll be a little bit more gracious, is you you have to know people, right? Especially in this space. Like integrity is everything when it comes to a nonprofit and trust. So if anyone is misusing funds, that can tank a nonprofit. A for-profit corporation, they can oftentimes recover from that type of a
Right.
thing. Especially in this space too, when we're protecting women and children. Man, if we partner with somebody who's abusive, who ends up being a dirty bird, who's exploiting and manipulating these vulnerable populations that we're working with. So that's the other thing is how do you expect me to work with another nonprofit that I really don't know? I don't know their culture. I don't know them, and I'm going to put them in a room with a survivor. I'm going to put them in a room with someone who's at their most vulnerable point. So I think even from very specific, I'm talking generally in nonprofit world, it's like, look, people, pull your head out of your ass, okay? You don't ask any other business why we have business competition, why everyone's not working together and collaborating. No one ever says that in the business space. Even a church, you know what I mean? Like, does anyone say, why do we need 15 churches in this city? Why don't we all just have one big church? Because there's all sorts of denominations and flavors for all different people. And that's the same thing in the nonprofit space, and very specifically in the counter trafficking space. And then again, man, I just cannot assume risk on bringing people into the camp that might spoil things. So what we have done with Skull Games, what we've tried to do is we have our core, and we try to separate the two by saying Skull Games Incorporated. That's our core team, our staff. And then we've built this Skull Games task force that anybody can participate in. So that's the other answer that I would have for folks is I've heard you, and in spirit, I agree with you. Why don't we collaborate and corroborate and play better together? So we have created an entity, Skull Games Task Force, that anybody can come play. There are a handful of people that I know are dirty birds. There are a handful of people that I know are just straight up liars. There are some very well-known anti-trafficking, counter-trafficking organizations that are completely full of shit and lying about all their numbers. They cannot play. They cannot come into the Skull Games tent. But really, I can count those on one hand. I can really count those on probably 2 or 3 fingers. Otherwise, anyone out there who is interested in this space, who's working, and anyone who's working with another organization, come and participate in Skull Games Task Force. We'll teach you what we do, how we do it, why we do it, and you go forth and replicate it. That is an exponential capacity that I would love to see.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I had never thought about it as the corporation sense before. It's so obvious now, right?
Yeah. You know what I mean?
But going back to your 150,000, that's nothing for a CEO, but you're right. People sit there and condemn it. Well, all that money should be gone. Okay, so how do I feed my family to continue doing the work that I need to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, I make a salary as a nonprofit. I was a COO for 2 nonprofits, and now I'm the CEO president of a nonprofit, and I have 100% made my salary. Now, the thing that we also look at too, and when you talk about salaries, especially in a nonprofit, those are our programs. Like our Intel director, that's what she does. She does Intel. Like it's her salary, but it's 100% a program. Joe, our law enforcement liaison, we took Joe's pay that he was getting as a cop, and we're paying his salary as a detective so he can focus 100% on trafficking. You know what I mean? So even when you look at Joe's salary, that is 100% a program. That's all he does. He teaches and goes after predators. That's all he does. And it's a wonderful thing, because even when he was a detective in Waco, he got pulled left and right on all these other things, right? A car accident or a burglary or a murder or all. So we've been able to insulate him, and luckily the sheriff that he works with has allowed him to keep his credentials there in Waco, and he's still a task force officer with Homeland Security. So like Joe's, I don't know if you remember, you're probably not old enough. I mean, I'm on the edge of it, of Paladin. Have gun will travel, right? Like Joe's a mercenary cop where he will go all over the country and the world to teach organizations how to do counter trafficking better, how to catch these pedophiles, how to catch these traffickers, how to do operations. And he doesn't get pulled with the cop work. He doesn't have to do any paperwork. I'd like him to do a little bit more paperwork, because sometimes I have a hard time keeping track of what Joe's up to. I'm kidding. So that's another model that I think is really interesting, and we want to continue to expand, is these law enforcement officers that are just really adept at counter trafficking and want to focus on it, creating a nonprofit structure that covers their salaries while they hold those credentials. I think that's a real future for impact.
Oh, I would agree too. And it's almost like taking all the constraints off too for them, right? I mean,
yeah,
except for the rest portion, right? And
Yeah,
that
yeah.
builds into your model with the partnership with law enforcement.
But
But
even that, Joe has arrest authority. You know what I mean? As long as he's
oh,
working.
that's true.
Yeah, that's the thing. That was what we lacked. We lacked the arrest authority because, but Joe has the arrest authority both at the federal level and the local level. Now it's just playing nice with others, right? So if he comes to Kansas City, he has arrest authority, but he needs to talk with folks in your area about, hey man, I'm coming to town. Let's cooperate. Let's collaborate. And that's the other thing. Guys that know Joe, they're comfortable in him just being another force multiplier. So it's the same thing. It goes back to, why don't all of our police just work together? Well, because there's a human dynamic. We need to know each other. I need to know you've got my back. I need to trust you. So Joe has that reputation where he can go into all these different cities and people bring him on, and he's another cop working the case that they don't have to pay for. Kevin Metcalf that we've talked about, a mutual friend of ours, he's a DA like that. Man, if I had the money, Kevin would be on Skull Game staff, and he would be a district attorney, gun for hire. You know what I mean? Same deal.
Oh, yeah.
He's got all the capabilities and capacity of a DA, and it's all he wants to do is he wants to prosecute traffickers and pedophiles and sex offenders and predators, but he's got to figure out how to make that happen. So I think that's another one out there. If anyone's listening and they want to cover Kevin's salary and have a DA on staff at Skull Games, call me. We'll make it happen tomorrow.
I would agree. He would be a perfect fit for the organization.
Wouldn't
Yeah.
Yeah.
I told him that here a while back.
Yeah.
That,
It would, and that,
that's
could you
why-
imagine? We got Kevin and Joe and Jessica, all of us working on the same team, So this goes back to your original question. It comes down to funding too. Like, man,
Right.
if you if you say, Tiegs, you are in charge of counter trafficking in the United States and here's your budget, man, I'll bring all these teams together. And some of these liars, they'll find themselves on the sidewalk with a boot in the ass. But the rest of them, we'll put you to work.
Agreed. Another point, though, that you didn't explicitly call out is that there's so many different portions of it, right? So you just talked about the prosecution. You talked about Jessica, which people should probably remember her. She's one who is helping people heal through tattoo removal and cover-ups and things like that. There's so many different aspects, right? We have the sex buyer, that we can go after, right?
Yeah.
But there's so many different portions. There's the healing portion. There's, the ones that get funneled into pornography. There's the root cause, right? The counseling and stuff. And Jeff Tiegs, you're a badass sumbitch, but you can't fill all those roles, right?
And I can't. And that was one of the things that when we really looked at it, who are we and what do we do better than anyone else? This is that business concept again, too, of what is our core competency. And it really is the hunting and the targeting. And on top of that, it's on the open internet. So that's where I think we are an extreme force multiplier, is we are able to identify women that are being sold online. So Skull Games almost exclusively looks at the online commercial sex industry. And you can kind of create a bit of that as well. I'll put a pin in that and come back to that. But there's an online sex industry of women and children being sold all the time. It's largely on escort ads. There's a whole bunch of other places, and you can see it, and you can identify who it is that's being sold, who's doing the selling. Sometimes you can identify who's doing the buying, but that's when you pass that to law enforcement, and then they figure out who's doing the buying because those operations come in. So that's where my military background and the people that we have on our team, they understand how to build target packets, how to build leads, how to cull information from oodles and oodles of points of data, and how to leverage technology. So that's what we're doing, is we're trying to get law enforcement to the point of probable cause, reasonable suspicion. Because once they get a subpoena signed from a judge or a grand jury to get inside this trafficker's devices, cell phones, computers, etc., and see what it is he's saying and doing to these victims, they have an open and shut case.
Right.
So we want to use the technology and let the technology speak for itself, and not re-traumatize these victims and force them to take the stand and continue to put them at risk. So that is the space. Someone like Jessica, who they're redoing those tattoos. She's also, because she's lived it, She knows how to be a victim advocate. She knows how to stick up for these women and help them find ways to survive and thrive. And then the one little thing that we can offer Jessica too is help her learn a new skill, help her understand intel analysis and open source intelligence. And now she also has an added drive in her life where she hunts bad guys. You know, the last Skull Games that we did also, because she's talented in art therapy, and you know, when we hold these 2-day events, we hold these kind of marathon events on a Saturday and Sunday where hundreds of people come in. You know, as we've done AARs, at the end of those, people have said, look, I got fatigued. You know, I'm looking at this crap. I'm looking at this pornography. I'm looking at this violence. I'm looking at this abuse. And I just need a way to like clean my mind and my eyes and my brain and kind of resettle. And that was one of the things that Jessica came in and did for us, was she had a couple of these art therapy sessions to help people kind of wash away some of the filth that they were looking at over the course of the weekend and reset. So there's just so much more to do. You know, and what we're doing. Yeah, and this thing scales, man. You know, like this, what we're able to do in probably 30 cities right now, we can do in hundreds of cities. It just needs to continue to get the funding behind it.
Right. No, that's awesome. You know, I love your platform because of how you involve other people in it, and the Skull Games thing, right? I mean, the game part of it is very intriguing and pulls people in, and you know, really makes them feel like they're part of the action, not just giving $20 here and there, and you know, that sort of thing, but actually taking part. And the name Skull Games, right?
Yeah.
You rarely touch on this that I've heard, but
yeah,
tell us the reason why you picked Skull Games for the name.
Yeah, so there's a famous pimp trafficker named Iceberg Slim, who was known to say, and he wrote some books, that pimping isn't a sex game, it's a skull game. So there's two things that we have to recognize and understand. It is sex that's being sold. It's a human body, you know, male or female, child, adult. It is a sex act that's being sold. But the control and the manipulation is largely mental. Even the physical aspect of it, when the physical violence is enacted by these pimps and traffickers, it's to control the mind. So you have to understand how they are tangling up these minds if we're going to untangle it. You have to understand what are the ingredients of their game and how do we get involved, how do we get in the middle of it and separate the pieces. You know, the pimps and traffickers call it the game. The victims, the girls, they call it the life. And I say this sometimes, and this is huge. If people I just want to pause for a second and have people take a moment and think about this. The girl that's being exploited calls it the life. And the girls that are with her are her sisters. They're her sister wives. The pimp, the trafficker that's running her is called her daddy.
Daddy.
There's this family aspect. All the terminology is familial. So it's under this pretense that this is a family. And you know, I know we talked a little bit. I know a little bit about your background. How many people are lonely? Let's not even say your background, but like people that are lonely or disenfranchised or disconnected with their families. People are looking for family. They're looking for meaning. They're looking for somebody else to build them up. They're looking for brothers and sisters to lock arms. They're looking for someone to take care of them. And these fucking traffickers, they pretend that's what they're doing. And they use the right language to literally brainwash these victims. But behind the scenes, they call it the game. And the girls are the stable. And they brand them to mark their territory and to mark their product. So that's the other piece of it. It's like, look, man, I know your game, and we're going to play your game, and we're going to beat you at your game.
So just a couple things in there. I immediately, when you were talking about that, right? Talking about these women who see it as family, you go over that in your book in the chapter, I believe it's called Finding Your Tribe.
Yeah.
You know, we all desire that. And
Yeah.
every person that I've talked to who has found themselves in this position of being trafficked, it's always it's always an emotional bond. It's always something lacking in their life. It's the lack of a father, or they
Yeah.
don't feel like they fit in because they had an unmedicated or undiagnosed condition or something along those lines that someone else tries to fulfill, or even just buying diapers for your kid, right?
Yeah. And that's
Someone to
what
be that
makes me,
financial.
that's what motivates me every day is, Steve, these guys are picking on the weak, the inherent weaknesses in mankind. You know what I mean? On these
Yep.
vulnerabilities. Someone who doesn't feel safe, they pretend they're going to be safe. Someone who doesn't have a place to live, they pretend they're going to give them a place to live. Somebody who doesn't feel love, they pretend that they're going to give them love. It's like they are absolutely devils. I mean, they are just the blackest of black. And the years that I fought against ISIS and Al Qaeda and the Taliban, look, some of those guys are terrible. Just again, devils on the earth. But many of them believe in their cause. Many of them believe in their radical Islamic ideology. Like there is a higher sense of what it is they're fighting for and killing themselves for. But dude, these traffickers, it's pure greed. It's purely for money. It's purely for this sense of control. There is not a redeeming quality about them at all. And when our society finally decides that we are going to just turn our back on these predators, pedophiles of age, stop using the word pimp as an adjective, a positive adjective. It's a trafficker, it's a rapist. When we start to call these men what they are, we'll know that we finally have arrived.
Yeah, and that whole, looking at it as a positive adjective, that word pimp, we've, in this country, we've upped the value of the dollar
Yeah.
over human life
Yeah.
all day, every day. And that's why
Yep.
people are attracted to it, right?
And dude, we've self-policed, right? There are words we don't say anymore. We don't say the N word anymore. We don't say the F word anymore. We don't say the R word anymore. There are words we don't say anymore. And if we were serious about this, we wouldn't say the P word. We wouldn't say pimp. We wouldn't say it. That would be another word that is just forbidden for people to say,
Right.
because they understand that means one thing: the sexual subjugation of another human being. And oftentimes it's someone young, because that's how they get their hooks into that manipulation. So when it becomes the P word and we don't say that four-letter word anymore, once again, I'll feel like we've arrived.
I
Until
agree.
then, we'll just keep getting in the ring and swinging.
It's an interesting point that you bring up too about the language, right? And we'll switch over here in a second, but it made me think. So every now and again, I just put on a playlist. It's just I usually don't even listen to music, but when I
Yeah,
do, I want to hear this, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
for whatever reason, I wanted to listen to Tupac the other
yeah, yeah,
day,
yeah,
and this is totally abstract for me,
yeah,
right? So I put on this playlist, and the lyrics are scrolling up, and it goes into whoever's next, right? And you're exactly right. The N word was N asterisk 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 asterisk, but they were saying words like pussy and pimp,
hoe,
and I
bitch,
mean,
whore,
yeah,
slut. Yeah, yeah, I know.
I mean, we can totally degrade every woman on the face of the planet,
Yeah,
right? And lower them in their dignity through this song, but yet on Apple Music we're blanking out the N-word, right?
yeah,
And it just
yeah,
it didn't correlate in my mind. Yes, we should blank out the N-word. We shouldn't probably say it,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
To start with, but we shouldn't blank it out if we're not blanking out the rest of these.
And dude, I'm not a Puritan, right? I'm not a Quaker. People, do what you want. I get it, but just go in with eyes wide open and allow yourself to slowly pass judgment on this stuff because we have. I remember I'm a big jujitsu guy, and one of the things I love about the sport is the equality in the sport between I've rolled on mats. I don't know who the guy is. I don't know if he's, as long as he doesn't stink, right? As long as he's clean and has a clean gi. I don't know if he's homeless. I don't know if he's a billionaire. I don't know if he's a doctor or a construction worker or working for a nonprofit. And same with the women. There are women there, and they're all treated with respect. And we guard ourselves. We self-police. Dude, if you comment on one of the women's bodies, another guy immediately will say, not here. Not here.
Yeah.
Not in jujitsu. You know what I mean? Of course, this woman's beautiful. She has a beautiful body. She's fit as hell. But we do not acknowledge that here because she is one of us and she's a jujitero like us, And you compete with them and you fight with them. And I love the sport. And a couple years ago, this is probably 2 years ago now, there was a women's jujitsu competition. I don't remember what the who was backing it, but it was the first time this group, it was women only. And I love women's jujitsu almost more than men's jujitsu because they have to do jujitsu. It's not using muscle. Yeah, like they really have to use the sport and the technique to succeed and win. And I put it on. I'm watching this thing called Flow Grappling, and I'm watching it, and it comes on, and the first women come out, and dude, the entrance song was like this degrading rap song about, like smack my bitch up, do this, spitter, blah blah blah. And I was heartbroken. I'm like, this is the most badass woman on the planet. And she is who I want my granddaughter to look up to. This woman has mastered some things. And she is absolutely tone deaf to the exploitive music that she's coming out to on a night that we should be celebrating the strength and confidence and capability of women. It broke my heart. So again, I just want, I don't want people to hear the wrong thing. It's like, look, I get it. Our culture is our culture, but my point is, over time we can self-police, and I just don't think we're even trying. What was it, 2 years ago? The halftime show was Snoop Dogg and all these people. Dude, half of those guys were pimps. They were literally pimps. And their music continues to celebrate when they were pimps. They beat women. They raped women. They forced women to have sex for money, and then they took their money. And they're on our halftime show, and we're holding them up on a pedestal like these are our heroes, which is my segue to the book. Where have all our heroes gone?
Before we get there, though, I do want to mention Skull Games.
Yeah.
They of course take donations because they are a nonprofit.
Yeah.
However, I want to tell you that they have some awesome merchandise.
Yeah.
Hats, shirts. You got just a ton of stuff on the website, and also a couple courses. There is a course on trafficking, and there's also a course on leadership. And are those the two courses that you got?
Yeah. So Protect Your Family is our course. So it is on trafficking, but it really is a broad look at what this crime looks like and how it impacts your family. It's not real specific to the offense and type of stuff that we do. And then there's a leadership course in there. And Steve, I'll send you a coupon code for this for any of your listeners to access that leadership code. And then the gear. Yeah, definitely check out the gear. Now I do want to say selfishly, don't just buy gear. You got to give us something, because we make the margins on that gear. We don't make shit. Like we make like $1 on a hat or 50 cents on a shirt. So I want you to have the gear, and I'm proud of people repping it. But please just understand, we went into that gear store to satisfy the demand that people wanted it. It is a very, very small source of revenue for us. So, instead of buying 4 t-shirts, buy 3 and give us the $30 to Skull Games, and we'll put it to use.
Yeah. So awesome mission. So go out there and support it, guys. It is fantastic. There's, I don't know if we got any really good numbers on what trafficking looks like in America, but I can guarantee you that it's one of the biggest crimes out there by
Well,
what I
one
know
one
about it.
one thing I can tell you is because we can count these, right? When you're talking about escort ads, there are 3 million active escort ads every day. There are 150,000 new escort ads introduced into the crime every day. So
Jeez.
when you're talking 150,000 new ads, and let's just say a third of those are repeats. So you're talking about 100,000 new ads are posted every day. That's 100,000 new women across the country that are being introduced into this crime. And then, like I said, at any given moment, there are 3 million ads for sex for sale out there. So those are astronomical numbers. And
Those are.
and we sift through those hundreds of thousands of ads to identify the women that we can see evidence of the trafficking. So that statistically 90 to 95% of them are being trafficked. This idea of an independent prostitute is very, very, very rare. So we know that statistically, but aside from that statistic, we have to have evidence, right? Because prostitution is one thing, pimping is one thing, trafficking and exploitation is another. So we painstakingly sift through all those ads to try to find evidence of trafficking, and that's the start point that we go from, and then build that out to see what we can find.
I asked Joe one time just to piggyback off from what you said, but I asked Joe, when you see a prostitute, escort, whatever, what is the percentage that that person's being trafficked in your experience? And he told me at that point, 85%
Yeah,
is what,
and
from his experience of 600 and whatever arrests that he's had, right?
yeah, and he would admit it's probably even higher than that. And then the other piece is the demographic, right? So when you kind of age out of a trafficker's interest. If you're in your 30s, mid 30s, like you kind of age out. So when you're adding all of the prostitution in, and you're adding in massage parlors where they're doing illicit sex and all that kind of stuff, that's where your numbers are made. When you're talking about that demographic, and I'm just using of age, 18 to 25, dude, that's 100%. That's 100%. And maybe in a snapshot of time, and there is a term for a woman who's not under control. It's called a renegade, and she's known as a renegade. If a woman is out there being an independent prostitute, all the traffickers know, and they call her a renegade, and she's off the reservation. And somebody
Wow.
will bring her back onto the reservation. Somebody will tame her and bring her to their stable. This goes back to this business idea, right? If you and I are traffickers and we get wind of a woman who is independently selling her body and making money, why would we let that happen? We
When you can make
respect
the big cut
this
of it,
fellow
right?
entrepreneur. No. You and I come in with the brawn and say, "Nice job. You work for me now." So even
Right.
this rare occurrence where you might find a woman who's independent, check in on her in a few months. Check in on her next year and see if she's still independent. She won't be, because a man will come in and he will beat the living daylights out of her. He will kill her clientele, literally, and force her to work for him. So again,
Right.
this romantic idea that women can just sell their bodies and get away with it, that it's a commodity that's theirs to buy and sell. Look, I don't disagree on some level that your body's your body. You can do with it what you want, but you have to understand what the world is. If you have a clientele, I'll take it. And I don't give a shit if you built that clientele off of your body and your independent sex work. It's mine now. And that's just a hard reality that people have to come to terms with.
Yeah, dang. And they have nowhere to turn, right? I mean, they go to the law enforcement, and law enforcement throughout the ages has been, okay, you're a prostitute, let's go to jail,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Which
And that's
that's starting to
slowly,
change,
it
but
is. It's starting to change, and again, I think Joe is single-handedly doing some heavy lifting. That's the other thing about Skull Games. We vet the law enforcement we work with. You know, if we get wind that that's the attitude, that they think of these prostitutes as hoes and sluts and whores and all that kind of stuff, and they don't understand the humanity behind it, I'm not really interested in working with them. You know, one of the other things that we do, in addition to the evidence, right? Like we have to get evidence that they can dig into a case. We build parallel to that something we call the compelling story. So in addition to the evidence that this woman is being trafficked, exploited, we build the compelling story, which is as much as we can find out about her. So now when you hand it to that law enforcement officer who might have the history or the habit of thinking of her as a prostitute or a whore, he has a background on her and he begins to see her as a human. Even her name, you know, like these women all have fake names, you know, Candy Rose, or these porn names, these stripper names, you know what I mean? So those names aren't just to hide their identity. It's to build this a fantasy and to break apart this humanity. This is a little girl. This is a little girl named Ruth. You know what I mean? Her name is not Ruby. It's Ruth. And 8 months ago, Ruth was on the debate team at high school and the captain of her soccer team. You know what I mean? She's now turning tricks down by the wharf. You know, so when you're able to show that to a cop who only sees her as Ruby turning tricks under the wharf, that she's actually Ruth and she comes from this, that's another thing that we're appealing to is because again, man, 99.9% of law enforcement go into that profession because they want to protect and serve their communities. You know, this rare bird who's a power freak and creep and all this kind of stuff that we want to pretend is the preponderance of law enforcement, that's a rare animal, you know? So when you can help them identify the humanity in these women, the compelling story that goes along with their life, that's another added bonus to getting these operations on a cycle.
And that's really where your background comes in, right? Is the leadership aspect of that. You got to sell the why.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Good
Which
call.
you talk about leadership in here. We can get back to that. So I fell into the trap, Jeff. I ain't gonna lie. Your background caught me, and I didn't give the book center stage, but we're gonna do that right now. So I want to start off by saying, telling everybody out there, you need to go out and buy the book.
Thank you.
You need to take a look. I read a lot of books in 2023. We're in 2024 now, right? Yeah. 2023. And this is by far the best book that I read.
Wow.
And you know, I mean, it's amazingly written, but there's also a format to it that allows every reader to take something away from every chapter. Okay. Jeff brilliantly, I'm going to say it again, has taken every chapter and he mixes his story. Well, it doesn't mix. He tells his story, tells a story from the Bible, correlates the two, and then summarizes the chapter. And I mean, it was just impactful. My wife is like, are you ever going to put that book down? I'm like, maybe not even in 2024. But she appreciates when I read because then I'm not pacing.
Yeah.
So thank you for the blessing that this book has brought to me and everybody else that I'm sure has read it.
It's high praise, and it's hard. I hear you and I appreciate it, but it's hard. It's hard to sink in. You know what I mean? And but what I can tell you, on one level, it's super satisfying because I didn't know if it was going to work. This is the first book I wrote. And I've been chipping away on it, and it had all sorts of different styles and different things that kind of and this end product I got to. So it was November of this year that it was released. It was probably about a year prior to that where I really got to, I think this is a formula. And I wasn't sure if it was going to work. You know what I mean? Because the other thing that's interesting is, I love movies, I love books, I read a lot, so there's a lot of people that I follow, and I'm one of those guys in a movie or in a book where I like you to give me just enough, and then you let me figure out the rest. You know what I mean? And that
Right.
was the thing that I really wrestled with. We're just like, the title, "Where Have All the Heroes Gone?" Sometimes I feel like I just need to leave that interpretation up to people. You know what I mean? And then other times I'm like, look, this is the point of the book. They're everywhere. They're right here.
Right.
They're living next to you. They're in your house. They're in you. You're the hero. You know what I mean? So sometimes you're like, I need to be spot on. I need to tell you exactly what it is. I want you to know. And other times I don't. And that was really the pursuit in the last couple editions of the book. Is like, man, I'm going to leave this kind of open ended. I'm just going to kind of point, or sometimes I point backwards to something in the book, or you don't realize early in the book I'm pointing to something that you're going to read later, and I had a lot of fun doing it, but when I hit send, like, here's the final, you're in your mind is like, I just don't know if it's going to work. I don't know, like, is it too confusing? Is there too much, all that kind of stuff. So it's incredibly satisfying to hear from people, a guy like, I've never met you before, to just say, look, it worked. I get it. It spoke to me. And I'm like, again, I wrote it in this room. I sat here in this room thinking about a guy like you, Steve, going, is this going to work? Is this going to land? You know what I mean? So I couldn't be more pleased.
My only regret, Jeff, about reading this book is that I couldn't have gotten an early copy so that I could be back here.
Yeah, that's cool. Hey,
I mean, I would love to sing its praise.
I'll take you up on that, because I'm working on a sequel, and it's the exact same format. I already have it outlined. I'm about 3 or 4 chapters in. None of them are finished. So the way I write is, because I have so many other things doing. If I ain't got it that day, I just let it sit. You know what I mean? So, like, I'll go in with an idea and I'll start writing, and sometimes it just flows. And then other times it really gets stonewalled, and I'll move on. So oftentimes I'm writing a bunch of different pieces of the different chapters, because the hard part is the Bible reference stuff, right? Like, I'll be digging into something, and I'll be like, oh, what does this mean? And it means this. And the next thing I know, 4 hours later, I haven't written a damn thing, and I'm confused about the serpent in the garden. Who was the serpent? What would he look like? You know what I mean? So that's I'm writing about Adam and Eve right now, and you get lost on these tangents. But it'll go much faster, because guys like you and other people have said this formula works. So now I know, stick to the formula. And the other piece, during the book, I had written all the Bible stuff. It was only going to be the Bible stories and the more of the story Bible stuff. And then I started adding these really, really short kind of stories about what it means to me as a soldier. And then that
Right.
grew and grew and grew. And then I moved all the stories around. So that was the other thing. I was like, I don't know if what fits where, if it's going to all land. Whereas now, in the second book, I'm already writing it that way. The Bible story, the more of the story, and the military story, there's already the connector that I have in mind. You know what I mean? So it should be easier to write, but it's getting going. Yeah, and I love it. I mean, finding more stuff about the Bible. I mean, it's just like, and there's some really crazy shit that I left for book two, because I was like, in book one, like, people don't know me, and when I start talking about Adam and Eve and the garden and the devil and some of these other ideas, people are going to think I'm flipping crazy. So yeah, just be forewarned. There's some pretty sci-fi, supernatural, fantasy, Lord of the Rings shit coming in book two, but I want to share it with you, and I'm also now, like, reinforced that, a year and a half from now, 2 years from now, when we're talking about book two, you're gonna say, on the surface, that is absolutely crazy, but I think you're right. You know what I mean? Because it's just, our God is a big God, and our story, like, we just just like I talked about in that book, it's
Oh,
like a tapestry, right? Like we see the back of this tapestry, and it's all of this the mix, and then you turn it around, and it's just this absolute beautiful detail. Um, and yeah, there's much more to talk about. So
so I'm gonna, I got notes here, and it kind of went chapter by chapter, but
cool. I've never
I'm gonna
done this.
break.
Let's do it.
Well, I'm gonna break down to about 2/3 of the way through,
Okay.
um, because I'm trying to find. Oh, it's fight to your last breath was the chapter. Okay,
Is that
and
Ferg?
yes,
Okay.
so it's where the Ferg was overturned in the
Yeah.
Jeep. You
Yeah.
worked on them. You can explain this a lot better than I
Yeah.
can, but what I picked out of there was you were working on him. His rib cage was crushed like a bag of
Yeah.
chips, I think is what
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what it sounded like when you were working on him. And, you know, a lot of people would find what you said in this chapter crazy, right?
Yeah.
That, um, that you saw or heard angels and they were
Yep.
telling you he's gone, right? And you're refusing to stop working on him. And then you saw a vision of him and he said,
Yeah.
let me go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I should have let you talk about it because I'm sure that it would have been better. So please go ahead.
Well, that is one of those. It's one of those chapters where you're like, some people are going to say this dude's crazy. You know what I mean? Or I don't believe any of this, and that's okay because it's like I'm sharing to you what I experienced, and you can explain it away. And that's one of the things in writing that the people that help me and coach me continue to say is be authentic, be genuine, and be vulnerable. Like be bold enough to describe what you experienced, even if it's crazy. If it sounds crazy to me. When you talk about it and when I think about it, dude, I can see him standing there. I can see those angels. I can hear their voices. I can hear his voice. And it's crazy. It is. I don't know what to tell you. But I would also, one of the reasons I kept that in there, Steve, and maybe soldiers aren't going to think it's crazy. If you've been to war, you've seen evil and you've seen light and you've seen things that you can't describe. When you've been around death a lot, you're going to see something. There's something beyond death. Death is not just the physical shutdown of this machine. Something happens, things move, spirits move, there's energy. So again, with people that have been in very violent situations, people that have seen danger and fear in really high degrees, no one thinks I'm crazy. There ain't a soldier alive that's been to combat that hasn't experienced something like that. So part of my courage was, hey, I'm going to tell my story because I'm telling your story. I'm telling someone else's story who doesn't have the faith background to say, yeah, man, take it or leave it. That's what I saw. That's what I experienced. Same with my faith life. This is what I believe about God and Jesus and the world and these stories and what's happened and what's happening and what's going to happen. And that's all I can do is share it with you. Take it or leave it, man. I got it. But for those of you that can relate to it, and it helps you understand something else that you've gone through, that's why it's in there.
I found that boldness to be absolutely beautiful in there because most people aren't willing to share those kind of things. And I appreciated that, so when you were talking about that, I'm like, okay, I've had those experiences, right?
Yeah.
Just like what you said. Um, and I would imagine the ones who have been in combat and had those experiences that don't know how to define it, it's always creeping in the back of their mind, right?
Yeah.
They know it's there, but they don't want to acknowledge it, right? And that could be where we have some of these, mental things with people who come back from combat and different things like that, I would imagine, right? Because
I
they don't know how to deal with that aspect of it.
I think wholeheartedly, that there is a spiritual aspect that you see. Like I said, I've killed men and seen men die and seen darkness leave them and go somewhere else. I've felt it come towards me, and I've been like, you know what I mean? But I've also have the armor of God and the shield, and the breastplate of righteousness. I've got this faith as a resistance, and I do believe, and this is going to be crazy to some of the listeners. I believe some of our men and women have returned from Iraq and Afghanistan carrying demonic influences that are really weighing on them, and if you believe in evil, right? This is the logic. These are my ifs, and that's fine. If you don't believe in evil, fine. If you believe in evil, what is it? If you believe in a spiritual aspect of evil, what is it? If you believe that there are things like demons and spirits that live out there that are evil, then doesn't it make sense that they've lived in places like Afghanistan and Iraq for thousands of years? And if you were a demonic spirit in Iraq that lived back in the Babylonian days, and you had the opportunity to ride an American soldier back to America, wouldn't you take it? And I think a lot of what our guys are experiencing is that oppression. Again, I name it of demonic oppression. Someone else can name it whatever it is they name it. But it only makes sense to me that we've gone into places that have thousands of years of evil and child sacrifice and abuse and exploitation and murder and genocide, and we come back dirty. And we've got men and women that don't know how to deal with that, which is another reason I'm hoping, even if it's just a coping mechanism, that some of the things that I've used to cope and learn and deal with it, they can copy and test it out for themselves.
Man, I'd never thought about it like that, but that's a free plane ticket back to one of, I mean, it's a breeding ground right now. I mean, let's face it, in America, I mean, it's a great place for something to come back to.
And isn't it logical, if you've come back from a war zone carrying something heavy and dirty and evil, that you would try to quiet that with drugs and alcohol? That the moments that you lose control of that, you resort to violent things and ultimately suicide. Like, it's just logic to me. I get it. I know it sounds crazy. We're talking about the spiritual realm.
Right.
We're talking about demonic influence. Yet somebody explain to me what's happening. Explain to me why our soldiers are turning to drugs and alcohol at a terrible rate. They're committing suicide at unprecedented rates. Somebody explain that to me. And I just find it logical.
So the interesting thing too is I want to ask another question in there to the audience, right? If you're a Christian, why don't you believe in spiritual warfare?
Yeah, I mean, that's just, yeah, that's one of those things again, like, because Jesus talks about it. When Jesus
Right.
gave his direction and power to the disciples, he was out there, go out there and cast out demons, work in the spiritual realm. The one that I believe the spiritual warfare is alive and well, and we all are equipped and expected to fight it in different ways. The one that I'm so perplexed on is the healing. Like, Jesus gave the power of healing. This is one I need to dig into. He gave the literal power of healing to the disciples, and they would go out and they would heal people. Where is that? I want that. I want to see that. I don't mean I want that personally. I don't think I want that responsibility, but I want to see that again. I want to see the power of God healing people. And if I remember correctly, I think we're going to see that again towards the end times. But what is preceding that to me is a confrontation of good and evil that Christians have got to step into that space.
So just kind of piggybacking off from that a little bit, right? When you talk about evil, when you talk about the devil, the truth is truth no matter what, right? So the only thing that he can do is distort the vision of the truth.
Yeah.
So when we take a look around, right, uh, we see some denominations dancing with snakes, I can't be bitten and die, even though that pastor died. Uh, and we see these people bumping people on the foreheads and they fall over. There's within that, I don't know which ones they are because I I just don't know, right?
Yeah.
But within that, there's some distortion. But what if there's some truth, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And we always know the greatest lies have just a hint of truth, right?
Right.
And that's one of those too that I talk about. I don't think I talk about it in the book. I allude to it a little bit, but I'm really going to dig into it more in the second book. So if you believe in good and evil, and you believe that the epoch of creation is Eve, woman. Woman was the masterpiece. And it's not a coincidence that this masterpiece is the creature that gives birth to children. So if women and children are the crowning accomplishment, the crown jewel of the creator, wouldn't it only make sense that that would be the thing that evil forces want to tarnish and want to harm? And then to me, the most diabolical thing is they're using us. They're using men to hurt and harm women and children. We're the ones that are supposed to defend and protect them. And it's twisted around, and it's the same with like sexuality. Sexuality is supposed to be this incredibly beautiful connecting thing that results in children. And it's become this crazy, crazy, distorted thing. That's again a prelude into book 2 as I'm looking at the Garden of Eden and sex and how did they procreate and this and that. Again, the whole idea of oh, you froze up on me. You still with me?
Yep, I'm still here. I think
Oh,
you're having a little bit of a connection issue on your side. You've been freezing
oh,
for a while, but
oh, have
it'll
I?
upload at the end.
Oh, okay. All
I've
right.
been I've been capturing it.
Oh, so that's what I was saying. That's one of those things that I'm really looking at is men and women and Adam and Eve and what happened in the garden and what happened with the sexuality and how did we so quickly go from perfection in the garden to murder with Cain and Abel? You know what I mean?
Mm.
So anyway, I think it's all a weird quagmire to
Oh, I
unravel.
get you. And just to kind of top that off too, right? I mean, uh, going back to the language and words, in today's world, patriarch is
Yeah,
one of the most evil words in the English dictionary, right? But it's also the most beautiful
it
word in
is.
the English dictionary.
Yeah,
My wife, I don't know what compelled her to do this one day, but I want to say it was probably about 12 years ago. She relinquished to me to be the head of the household.
yeah,
She gave that as a gift to me, right? And in that manner, it is absolutely beautiful,
yeah,
right? But the other side of that is these men that you're talking about who take power over women and play the head games, right?
yeah,
It's not given to them, they take it or
yeah.
they manipulate it from people.
And isn't it the greatest honor that could ever be bestowed upon you? It is your responsibility to lead your family. It's an honor and a heavy weight. And that's how I feel about leadership in general. So you can extend that. Like we almost have it upside down. We always have this this leadership pyramid, right? The leader's on top and then it's this base of people. To me it's upside down. The
Right,
the leader is on the bottom of that triangle. You're serving all of those people. It is my honor to lead this group of people. And it also to me also more accurately reflects the weight of that responsibility. An inverted
right.
triangle, that tiny little point, that's you, that's me, that's our family, that's our community, that's our church, that's our workplace. Those are all of the other things that we decide to engage in. That is a heavy, heavy load to carry. But I wouldn't have it any other way, and I believe it's God ordained. I really do.
I wouldn't disagree with you one bit on that, Jeff. Something else that I found you were really bold in, and this is, I mean, just right out of the gate, which brings us to the beginning of the book again, is, as you could probably tell back here, I got St. Joseph and a couple
Yep.
other things. I'm a Catholic. My family's Catholic. Uh, it's not often where we get to hear someone who's a Protestant,
Yeah.
Lutheran, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, come out and say, guys, we need to learn from this history,
Yeah.
right? From the
Yeah.
Catholic Church, from the Jewish faith. There's so much beauty that we're blocking off from ourselves. So I thought that was a pretty bold maneuver, and I appreciate that too, because I got a saying I tell people all the time, right? As far as faith goes, if you want to go from LA to New York, as long as you know where you're starting and know where you're going, there's 1,000 ways to get there. It's just how long is it going to take you, right?
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
go this way, you can go that way, you can go through cities, you can take the rural landscape. It doesn't matter, but you're ending at the same destination point, right?
Yeah. I have the more and more I study different writers, Catholic writers, and Catholicism, the more respect I have for it. I mean, it's interesting because Martin Luther, the Lutherans, that was the tradition I grew up in, literally rebelled against the Catholic Church. You know what I mean? The Reformation, and there were
Right.
certainly some things because it was a manipulation. I get it, man. I mean, I don't ever want to be called a religious person. If someone says, "Are you religious?" No, I'm not religious at all. Even for you to say, I'm not a Lutheran, I'm not a Catholic, I'm not a Protestant, I'm a follower of Yeshua. Like I'm none of those things. But those were the traditions that I was brought up in. And I was
Right.
taught, reinforced as a Lutheran to dismiss a bunch of this Catholic nonsense, and the Catholic canon, the Apocrypha and the Pseudepigrapha. I was taught as a child that was you should not read those books. And as an adult, and I want to encourage everybody, read those books. Read the Apocrypha, read the Pseudepigrapha, read those books. Not that you're looking for doctrine, but just like I say in the book, you're looking for seasoning. You're looking for the small t truths that are sussed out in those things. And I think, like the book of Adam and Eve in that it didn't make the cut in the Bible. Fascinating read, and it talks about what their bodies look like and how they lived, to be hundreds and hundreds of years and all this. And while I don't necessarily believe everything in that story, it's closer to than what we've interpreted Genesis in Lutheranism and Catholicism. I mean, what
Right.
was a perfect body? How big was it? Was it 5'9"? Was it 9 feet? Like what? Angels are big. The Nephilim and the demons are big. I mean, like how big was it? And when you see Jesus in his glorified state, when you see these angels in their glorified state, they shine and there's a light coming out of them. So when in the book of Adam and Eve, it talks about how they had a glow that came out of their bodies, and when they sinned, that glow died. It went away.
Wow.
So when they sinned, they looked at each other for the first time and saw that they were naked. Okay, so again, these are things that we know, but it's like, what does that really mean? They saw that they were naked. This divine glow that they had went out.
They were shed of that glow.
They
Yeah.
were shed of that glow, and they saw their bodies in this other state, and they were humiliated, and they wanted to cover it up. And God took pity on them and created clothes to cover up. So once again, you can read that and be like, they saw themselves naked for the first time. You're like, we're talking about twigs and berries and boobies? No. I think there's something more there. And it
Right.
talks about it in this book that many people haven't read. It talks about what people before us, hundreds and thousands of years ago, really thought that meant. So to me, those are the kinds of things that are intriguing. And I want to encourage people to study all of these different traditions, And I think we find these legends and these myths and these truths, and guys like C.S. Lewis and J.R. Tolkien, they always talked about that. Joseph Campbell, now, what's his name? The 12 Principles for Life.
Jordan Peterson.
Jordan Peterson. Again, he talks about
Yep.
myth. You know what I mean? Like myth and legend. Man, there's truths there. It's why these things have lasted thousands and thousands of years. So don't dismiss it. Put it on as seasoning of the doctrine that you believe in, the tradition that you stand on, and I think it'll enrich your walk.
Well, I think it's a lot like those memes that we see, right? Where you see the guy with the knife and he's going after the other, but when you see the next clip and you see that he's behind the TV recorder, right? You get to see that it's really not a knife, and you see the rest of the picture, right?
Yeah,
So you
yeah, yeah.
start piecing all these things together, and it gives you a more full picture.
Yes, yeah,
And I found that to be true when you start talking about David and Goliath in here, right?
yeah,
So the 5 stones. I've never picked that up before.
yeah,
Never once picked that up.
yeah,
That he was a sniper.
yeah, yeah. And that's what's fun, and this is another example of leadership and responsibility. Like, I feel, because this is a passion of mine, and I have the time, and I've had the opportunity to live in Israel and walk those lands, and I have the time to read what other people have written. I Even though it's fun and it's a passion, I feel it's a duty to share this stuff, and that's where I'm able to pull, the idea of David being a sniper. That came from Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm Gladwell, one of his books talks about David and how, he studied the sling throwers and what the stone was, and that was like a 380 that had the impact of a 380 pistol, and it had the accuracy of 50 meters of hitting a bullseye in the X-ring. These guys were practiced and trained. So a guy like Malcolm Gladwell talks about that, and then I go back to the Bible, and the Bible leaves us clues, right? Like, that wasn't David's first rodeo. He
Right.
he had fought a bear. He had fought a lion. So he already killed a bear and a lion, and I just assume he did that with a sling, right? So, like, God had already been preparing him and testing him. How many thousands of times did he throw that stone with that sling and hit a target this big? So he was very well practiced. He was ready for Goliath. He was a sniper, and he knew it, and then that was another one of those things when I have the time to just read my Bible, because I've read it so many times. That's how I do it now, is I look for new things. And when it says that he kneeled down into the river ravine and he chose 5 smooth stones and put them into his bag, well, that really struck me. What, of all the things for God to make sure we've carried down through centuries, like you and I in 2024 are reading about something that happened 1000 BC, 3,000 years ago, this story happened. How is it that God wanted us to know that detail about 5 stones? So
Right.
that begins the journey and the look, and what have other people said, and other people have studied and looked at it. And again, there's a very common belief that David had 4 brothers, and not David, Goliath had 4 brothers. And to me, as cool as we think the story is of David and Goliath with the 1 shot, 1 kill sniper, it's even cooler than that. He was ready to kill 5 giants with
Right.
5 stones. You know what I mean? And that's where I kind of, I kind of tip of the hat to God, who's up there, the author of it all, going, see what I did there? Yeah, fun, right? Like, this kid had it going on. I can tell you he was a man after God's own heart. I can tell you he was something special. But yeah, he believed in me so much that he was prepared to kill 5 giants with 5 stones. Dude, I don't know a sniper on the planet who wants only 5 rounds to shoot 5 men.
I hear you. But not too many snipers are going in there with that kind of confidence in God
Yeah,
either.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So it's interesting because, you talk about God as being the author. And I had one of my employees tell me today the reason why she loves Fight Club is she just showed it to someone for the first time. And right when it got over, they're like, "What? Can we watch that again?" Right.
Yes. Yeah. And that's what I mean. Where that's, if you think Fight Club is cool, like God's doing that all the time. Like he's
Right.
like everything we do in art and music and writing and literature and family and relationship, it's all like a really faint glimmer of what God is up to all the time. He's built an entire creation that has these Fight Club things happening in it. You know what I mean? These things that are repeating and things that are what they seem. And if you pay attention and you see it. So yeah, I think that's a perfect example. I always say like Lord of the Rings type thing. If you like the mythology and the story of
Right.
Lord of the Rings and C.S. Lewis or Fight Club, you're gonna dig it. Pulp Fiction, maybe not with all the swearing, but the complexity and the way the stories, like, dude, God,
Exactly.
that's what God has created for us. We're all in the same story. You're a character. I just watched Chappelle just had his latest stand up show, Dave Chappelle, and he and
Yep.
he and he has this interesting thing where he talks about sometimes you're in his movie and he's the star, and
Hmm.
sometimes he's in your movie and you're the star. And as he's gotten older, he's beginning to understand and know what those roles are. And that's how I feel about the Bible, and that's how I feel about life. Like, even like this right now, I can't tell if this is my movie and you're in it, or this is your movie and I'm in it. And because I can't tell, we're probably in someone else's movie. You know what I mean? Like someone else is the star right now. That this is what it's all about. And when I have the moments where I'm excited and that's how I feel. I'm like, this is my movie. Welcome to it. Or I'm happy to be in your movie. And then those other moments, I'm always confident. I don't know whose movie I'm in right now, but I'll play my role to the best of my ability. You know?
I love that view. I love that view. Man, there's just so much in this book. So I'm gonna hit a couple of topics
Okay.
because I think probably putting out a 2.5, 3 hour interview is probably a little bit much for the guest, but I could go on that long for sure. Um, so you walk through this story of David and mirror your own military career, which was your life at that point in time, right? Before you got to come home to your wife and kids. You have, I mean, just so much depth in that, with David and, the betrayal and, his mighty men and all of that. So I guess my overall question is, you see all these different steps and you put all these stories together. Uh, was it like an instantaneous sort of thing that you came to, or is it,
Uh,
or did it come before, like when you're reading your Bible and you're like, that's what happened today?
yeah, both and. So there were times where I had like a supernatural like vision of something, you know what I mean? Or I literally like a dream where like God would like plant this seed or this idea and like I would see something. And then I always immediately would go to seek out who else has had the same thing. You know what I mean? Like in the entire book, I don't know if there's, I think there's only, yes, of all that I can remember. I have to go back and then every single thing that I talk about in the book, someone else has come to that realization. You know what I mean? Even though I felt like it was a very personal thing that God was kind of revealing to me, when I started doing the research, somebody else said the same thing. The only thing that I think, and I'd have to go back, the only thing that I think that no one has ever said is that Jesus on his 40-day walk, I believe, went to Mount Sinai. I'll have to go back and look in the book to see if I even reference anybody, because this was one of those things again, and this is it was a great question, Steve, and it really all unfolded. Like I'd have these moments, even like with the David thing. I was trying to look for like this correlation between David and a sniper, and then all of a sudden it just dawned on me that the M24 holds 5 rounds, and I was like, oh, that's cool. You know what I mean? Like that literally was just like oh, and then throw that in, and like some people are like, oh, that's cool. You know what I mean? So it's just kind of like this, all these little added bonuses. But with Jesus, so I'm looking at this whole process. Yeah, I'm enjoying this because I'm sharing this process. So I'm looking at John the Baptist. What did he do? You know what I mean? I'm looking at the disciples. What did they do? I'm looking at this from an efficiency perspective, like Jesus going from town to town to town, and how did he know what route to take? And like this idea again, when you walk this land, there's a river. Where's the bridge? How do I cross the river? Well, dudes, go ahead of me and build a bridge. You know what I mean? So there's like, that's where I'm trying to figure out, like, what did these disciples do? And this 12-man A team. So that's when I have that chapter of the engineer where it's like, hey, Jesus is going to go to this town next week. Go scout the route. Make sure that it's still navigable. You know what I mean? Talk to the people. Make sure we're not going to get mugged. Make sure we can find water and food. And if there ain't any bridges, build a bridge. Find a. You know what I mean? So there's all these things that I was looking at, which is just common sense, right? So
right.
as I'm kind of seeking those things out. Those happen first. And then when I'm talking about Jesus going to the desert for 40 days, I thought, there's just no way. Like we think of him like just sitting there, like praying, like, stoking the fire and eating marshmallows. Like there had to have been a very, very distinct purpose. So then I started searching and all these other things. And clearly the Mount Transfiguration shows up where it's Elijah and Moses. Well, why Elijah and Moses? Why was it those two? What do they have in common? They both saw God at Mount Sinai. Did Jesus say God at Mount Sinai? I don't think so. Well, maybe, you know what I mean? So it's like, it's just this pursuit and this journey and all of this. And then the other piece of it was like, Mount Sinai to me sticks out like dog balls. Like it has nothing to do with anything. Like it's like you have Moses there, burning bush, 10 commandments, Elijah shows up there, and then that's it. So when I'm trying to be consistent with when I'm saying God's doing something that we need to look for it, yet there's this mountain in the middle of Egypt or Sinai or whatever that's just kind of this standalone thing. I don't understand. Like, why is this special? So what you're gonna find out in book 2 is I also believe, Steve, that God formed Adam on Mount Sinai. I'm doing a hand and arm signal. He formed Adam, and then he placed him in the Garden of Eden. So this is one of those things. You've probably read it 1,000 times, but it never really clicked.
Right.
Adam was not created in the garden. It clearly says he was created and placed into the garden that God planted to the east. So
right.
We're going to get in book 2, an extension from book 1. I believe Adam was formed on Mount Sinai. That's what makes it special. It's the first place God touched the earth. It's where God gave us his laws. It's where God sanctified his prophets. It's where God sat and taught his son. I believe Paul went to Mount Sinai because when Paul had his conversion, he had a 3-year, when Paul had his conversion on his road to Damascus, he doesn't enter his ministry for 3 years. He disappears, dude. We know he was taught by Gamaliel, but what else happened? And Paul says in one of his letters in passing that he went to Saudi Arabia and he was taught by God. I believe Paul went to Mount Sinai and spent some time.
Wow.
So I'm giving you some sneak peeks in book 2, but that's my point. I'll have to go back and look. I don't know of anyone else who has ever really thought about and proposed ideas about what Jesus did on those 40 days and where he went and why. And again, this goes back to a soldier, right? Like when I go through Ranger Assessment Selection Program and then I show up at my platoon, I'm expected to be the platoon leader. When I go through the Q course and I show up on my ODA, I'm expected to be the ODA commander. When I go through Delta Force selection and operator training course and I cross the hall and take over a troop, I'm expected to lead that troop. So again, in my personal experiences, that 40 days was testing and training and preparing Jesus to come and say, this is it now. I'm in charge. You're my dudes. Follow me. Let's go. So something special had to happen. Some intense testing and training, to get him ready for this 3-year push that culminates in absolute suffering and death.
So you really solidified in all that a thought that, I tell people quite often, right, when they're struggling, is you find God in the struggle, right?
Yes.
You find God in the questions. And your questions are way more advanced than mine. I'm going to tell you that right now. I'm still like, how do I spell my name? Right. But, that whole quest for that knowledge, listening to you rattle off all those questions and the connectors and all that, that was amazing for me. It makes me want to go dip into my Bible right now, which I need to do more of anyway.
Well, and that's what I mean. I've read. I was privileged to be raised by parents in the Lutheran Church. I was baptized as an infant. You know what I mean? And I've had the Holy Spirit in me, and I've known this walk with Jesus all my life. So with that privilege, I feel honored to be able to share this. Like the guy who's cracking open the Bible for the first time. I'm a little jealous, right? Like when he really gets to get that first taste of God and Jesus and all of this. Yet I feel sorry for them too, because it's hard, it's complicated. Genesis, Exodus, awesome. And then you get Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and it's like, oh my God, you know what I mean? Like you Psalms and Proverbs can be beautiful. It's like the Bible is not an easy read. So I feel privileged, and actually I'm using the word duty again. I feel it's my duty of what my parents have given me, and all these men and women that have taught me, to take it one more level and ignite. Dude, my sons are cracking open the Bible again. They were in Israel with us. Their faith is as solid as it comes, because they, as young men, as teenage boys, they saw that this is not theory. These aren't made up stories. These places exist. There's evidence of people commemorating this within the generation of Jesus' life. You know what I mean? So they have a faith that's rock solid. But like many of us, they've been disenfranchised with religion and all this other stuff that's been layered on top of it. So this quest to kind of strip away the religion and just see the story for what it is, and add this, I keep calling it the seasoning. I'm just having a blast, and talking with guys like you who are inspired to crack open the Bible and find something new, find something that I've missed, or you know what I mean? I want to hear that by the thousands. I can't wait for someone to come back and say, "Hey man, did you think about this? Or I think you got this wrong. Have you thought about that?" One of those is, and I talk about in there, a friend of mine named Chaz. When Jesus was laid on the cross, again studying how they did that. Again, he clearly wasn't nailed through the palm, because that would tear away. He had to be nailed through this, which is excruciatingly painful. You know what I mean? So, and because those nails were used over and over, there were pre-drilled holes. Again, I talk about this in the book, but there's pre-drilled holes in that crossbar. So depending on how long a guy was, they might have to like dislocate an arm to get that over a hole. So they would tie a rope and they would pull that arm, if they had to dislocate it or not, and jam that nail through and then do it on the other side. And this friend of mine told me, he said, I had this vision from God once that Jesus laid his hand over the hole and they nailed it, and he laid his hand over the other hole, and they didn't have to coerce him to do it, because Jesus knew he had the wherewithal and the courage and the discipline to know he only has a few more opportunities to show people, I'm doing this willingly. I am laying down on this cross of my own accord. No one's kicking me. No one's forcing me. No one's pulling this and pulling that. I am laying myself down here. So I asked him if I could use that in the book. So there are other things that people have told me, and I'm looking forward to the day when someone sends me an email and says, hey, look into this, or hey, have you thought about this? Oh, the other thing that made the book, same guy, was he told me about when the Joshua crosses the Jordan, and he steps in the stream, and then the Bible says the water piled up at the town of Adam. Well, I didn't think anything of it, and he had read stuff. Well, and I don't remember this part in the book. Well, so Adam is like upriver, like 20 miles or something like that.
Right.
So it didn't happen immediately. We have this vision of the Levites and Joshua touching the Jordan and it parts. No, dude, they were like up to their necks, like, is the water gonna part? Is the water gonna part? Because it's piling up. All that water still had to pass, I did a number on my throat. So there are things that other people have told me that they've thought about and studied and God has planted in their mind. And I'm looking forward. So again, this is a call to anybody who has an idea or a concept like that God has shared with them. Let me know, and I'll credit you and put it in book 2.
It's awesome. Like I said, I could go on for hours about this book, and we didn't even touch on a lot of the stories of your own, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Of course they're interwoven within the stories of the Bible, but we're going to have to do a part 2 at some point in time, Jeff.
I'm good. Yeah, I've enjoyed it. Yeah, and I think the thing also that my stories are, a lot of the Bible stories are the extreme, right? Like David killing a giant, or even of these betrayal, this getting double crossed and almost killed, But I'm hoping what people take from the book is their own story. Like, that betrayal that I experienced by that young man in Iraq, that doesn't hurt me. That doesn't hurt my heart. The betrayal that I've had from friends, you know what I mean? The business partners that I've worked with that have screwed me over, you know what I mean? People that have lied to me, even when I feel like my wife isn't giving me the respect that I deserve. Those things hurt me way more than this crazy dramatic story of double cross and intrigue that almost resulted in death in war. You know what I mean? So I'm hoping that people read these things and killing giants. I've seen giants. I've seen giants in Iraq and Afghanistan, these 6-fingered, 6-toes, leftovers from the Bible. I've killed giants, not like David. But again, those aren't the things, the courage to be patient. When my son, I'll share a quick story, when one of the things of when I got out of the military that I loved was a whole new style of fatherhood, and that's my kick right now. God tries to describe himself as our father, and it's Abba in Hebrew, which is more like daddy. It's not father, it's daddy. It's that personal. He wants us to call him daddy. He wants us to think of him as our daddy, like that tight of a relationship. And so that's been shaping the way that I view things. When we pass judgment on these things that are happening in the world, with people that are transgender or homosexual or a different political persuasion, it's like, if my son was transgender or my son was homosexual, I don't have to say that I believe that it's right, but I would love him. There is nothing my children could do that could separate them from my love. Nothing. And I'm a weak-ass mortal man. So when you're talking about our Creator who wants us to think of him as our dad, how in the world do you think he's passing judgment on his children like that? So that's that's really what I've been trying to focus on. And when I retired, I was able to change the way I parented because I was like I was home literally half the year, if not less. So when I was home, I was there to make experiences, right? I was fun dad,
Right.
like I had two boys and it was adventure time and we played and my wife shaped our life around it. They homeschooled. So when I was home, they didn't do school. It was adventure time and play and experience. And yet but I also felt like I only had a certain amount of time to see my sons and assess their character and make on the spot corrections. So I think I was a little too quick to correct. You know what I mean? And I remember one day my son Jonah, who's just a beautiful, sensitive young man. I just spent the weekend with him. He came down and he sassed at my wife. And I was about to be like, what did you just say? Who do you, that's, you know what I mean? But I had the idea of, hey, this is a good kid. I don't know what's going on. I don't know. He woke up on the wrong side of the bed. I don't know what's happening. I'm going to let this sit. I'm not going to correct him. He snipped at his mama. We'll see. And sure enough, Steve, a couple hours later, no prompting of my own, he came down, hugged his mom, apologized for being a dick, you know what I mean, and moved on. And that I'll never forget, because to me, that was courage. That was being a father. I saw something that was wrong, but I also recognized that I have a son that's honorable and integrous and loves his mom, and give him just a little bit of a time to make that own correction. So again, when we talk about these things, like what's heroic, to me, that is one of the most heroic things that I've ever done. Is I shut my damn mouth. I let my boy be my boy. I let him identify the problem and create the solution and rebuild that bond with his mama. To me, that's more heroic than things that I have little ribbons that I wear on my chest for,
That's a really cool story, and I need to try that as well, because I am very much,
Yeah.
your mom will be respected,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. 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 And again, you have to make those calls. You have to make them on the spot. And yeah. And sometimes it ain't the right call. Again, I don't remember how much, he might have come in under the wire, because I might have said to myself, he's got 2 hours. If that son of a gun doesn't come down and apologize to his mom, I'm going up there and he's going to get some what for, you know what I mean? I don't remember how it laid out. But again, that's how I feel our relationship with God is. He gives us the rope that we ask for, and he's begging us and he's imploring for us to turn around and come back to him and lean on him, and fall on grace and love and mercy and forgiveness, not judgment.
So it reminds me another spot in the book before we
Hit the 3-hour mark.
hit the 3 hour mark. It reminds me of when you're talking about Jesus and how, being nailed to a cross and beaten and everything like that wasn't the true courage that he showed. It was within his restraint,
Yeah. Yeah.
which
Yeah. And
yeah,
this was one of those things. Like I had this, this came to me years ago, and I really didn't have the courage to say it. And I don't think it didn't come into the book until way end drafts, because, again, you're saying dying on a cross, like getting whipped and dying on a cross. I could do that. You know what I mean? Like as a child, what impressed me with Jesus was the discipline and the ability to suffer, and the willingness to suffer. As a man, that doesn't impress me. And again, I didn't say this for years because I sound like such a jerk. Oh, you think you're Jesus? No, that's not my point. My point is, if you're gonna whip me and put a crown of thorns on my head and crucify me, but my children and wife live, I'll do that every day, twice on Sunday. If you're telling me I need to do that to save the entire world, I will do that multiple times a day. That physical courage, that ability to suffer for somebody else. But I really honestly don't know if I could have kept my mouth shut. Because once again, physical pain, I'm a man, I can take physical pain, but it hurts when somebody calls you something that you're not. When somebody accuses of doing something that you didn't, and in fact, they're accusing you of doing something that you abhor. You know what I mean?
Right.
So as I've grown as a man, what blows me away is his humility and his quiet and his silence, you know. And I'm a blabbermouth. I'm a talker. I need to learn to be quiet, to be silent. And I think that's part of this process with writing this book too. Is it's the best of both worlds, where I have the discipline of writing, and I have the focus and the mission of writing, and yet what comes with it is a silence and a peace and a quietness to listen. And that's what blows me away. Is Jesus had the power to lessen the pain. You know what I mean? He could have spoken out and defended himself. He chose not to. And man, I don't know if I'm ever going to learn that lesson, Steve. I don't know if I'm ever going to learn the lesson of just shut up, just take the lies and let it be. And unfortunately, I feel like God has been allowing me to learn that. I've had people in my life who have been betraying me and have been accusing me of things that I haven't done and speaking poorly of me. And I'm just silent because I'm confident that my body of work, my life up until now, will stand and speak for itself, you know, and the authenticity and the genuineness that I'm sharing with you will overcome what other type of false witness is being laid out there. So again, be careful what lessons you want God to teach you, because he'll teach you.
Well, let's be honest too. With the line of work that you're in, you're
Yeah.
definitely in the devil's playground. So
Yeah.
he's going to try and knock you off course every chance he's got.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's another one that people always ask us about with these pedophiles and these predators is, you know, there's this almost this false sense of bravado where people are like, I could never do that work. I would kill that guy. It's like, well, I understand that on a certain level, and I do have those feelings, ever more fleeting. But when you believe in good and evil, and you believe in justice, there's nothing I can do that our creator, our judge, isn't going to lay on that guy.
Right. Well, I think that's a good way to wrap this up for sure.
And
So
let me just talk about the reciprocal of that. And I also believe people who have a problem with pain and a problem with suffering, and what type of God would allow a child to be sexually abused. The God that I follow is going to reward that child for eternity. Any pain, any abuse, any misconduct, any violence, any sexual assault that this young child, this young boy, this young girl, this adult had to withstand in this life, they will be paid with rubies and gold and feasts and honored. That's this idea of the Sermon on the Mount, where the meek will inherit the earth. These people that suffer today, and you question if there's why a good God would allow that suffering, because it's infinitesimal. It happens for years. It happens for minutes. It happens for days. It happens for months. No one lives more than 100+ years, right? They will have an eternity of being honored and praised and rewarded for what God allowed the evil to stain them with. They will be white as snow and magnified and justified. So that's how I believe. Not only is there justice for predators and abusers, there is justice for the abused for eternity.
Wow. Now that's even a better way to end. So, for everybody wanting to, help out Skull Games any way that they can, what's best way to reach you at, Jeff?
Yep, skullgames.io is our website, and there's a donate button on there. You'll see it. We try to highlight it. The donate button. We have a new system through Anodot that you can choose different ways to pay. One-time pay if you want to sign up for monthlies. Our gear store, you can access our gear store through skullgames.io. If you're interested in our courses, the Protect Your Family course or the Leadership course, again, I'll send you that coupon code. You can get to those through the website, skullgames.io. If you're interested in my book, it's on Amazon, Where Have All the Heroes Gone? A Pilgrimage Through the Bible, the Battlefield, and Back Home Again. There's another book out there called Where Have All the Heroes Gone? That you can, don't get stuck on that one. You got to put a little bit more in. The audio is me. I had a blast recording the audio. So if you're not a reader, I enjoyed the audiobook. I'm super proud of it because I was able to read the book the way that I meant to say it, because I literally say it, so I definitely encourage people to take a look at that. There's audio, there's Kindle, there's the softcover. My website, wherehavealltheheroesgone.com or jefftiegs.com, you can access the book there to buy, the leadership courses there. So there's more than enough ways to connect with us. And we'll open up in February. We've got a bunch of hunting going on in January. In February, we will open up applications again to be part of the task force. So if people are interested in becoming part of the Skull Games task force, be on the lookout. It'll probably launch February 1st-ish, sometime around there. We'll get people integrated and trained up for a hunt in April. So more to come.
And that hunt in April, is that one specific location, or is that going to be multiple?
So when I say hunt, we're usually hunting multiple locations. So sometimes it's a hunt very specific because an operation is going on. So maybe we're hunting Kansas City. Excuse me, and Kansas City police are out doing an op. So sometimes that happens, but most of the time we're hunting multiple locations. So the April one is our next big event that will be open to the public. It's going to be hosted in Tampa, Florida. It's at a training center that has a bunch of top secret stuff going on. So you get badged. It's really, on one hand, it's kind of a pain in the ass. You know what I mean? But it's like, hey, if you've never kind of seen the secret squirrel stuff, you're going to a secret location. You know what I mean? And you get badged in. And there'll be probably 100 plus people playing in person, 100 people playing online. And we hunt all over the country. So these big hunts, that's our next big one. And we usually hunt about 20, 25 different cities. So we're sitting in Tampa, but we're hunting all across the country. And you're building packets and pushing those to law enforcement that are ready to receive. So it really kind of depends when, we have the big task force hunts, and then we have kind of the smaller hunts that are going on. Like as we speak right now, we're supporting a hunt in Riverside, California. We have a hunt next week somewhere. I don't even know where. There's a hunt in Texas next week. So, so I kind of use the same words. But usually when I say task force hunt, that's the one that we're open up for the public. Come on down, play the game. It's a weekend party. We try to gamify it and make it as fun as possible. And the teams compete against who can find the most victims to offer services to, who can find the most predators that we can try to get arrested, and we just have a great time.
Well, expect me to get involved in the very near future, because this sounds like an awesome place to get your hands dirty.
Half the players already, so it'll be like a homecoming for you.
Yeah, family reunion.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, God bless you, Jeff. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast. I'm sure all the listeners will take something away. Once again, go out and get the dang book. Come on now. I will admit, too, that I read the book and listened to the audio book.
What'd you think of the audio?
So I'm going to
It's
be
a-
honest with you.
yeah,
At
yeah,
first, so a lot of times I'm listening to these leadership
yeah,
audiobooks, this, that, and the other, and I had it set on 125,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and you sounded like a chipmunk, so I shut you off, and then I popped it back open, and I'm like, he's on 125. Let's put it back to 1. Oh, he
And that
sounds
worked.
pretty good now.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't. Again, I don't know. I had a really fun time recording it. You know what I mean? And the guy that I did it with was a total pro. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I know it sounds good, but I'm not sure because you don't have that reference if how hard it is to follow because I jump around a lot, so I have to imagine people that are listening to it, they have those moments where they're like, where are we? What are we talking about? You know what I mean? I don't know if I just have to imagine that. But the flip side of that too, I think is again, I get an opportunity to emphasize the things that I want to emphasize and say it the way that I meant it. You know, so yeah, fun.
So for me, I probably didn't notice those transitions because how I
Yeah,
do that when I do the audiobook,
yeah.
I'll read a chapter, I'll listen to a chapter, right?
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So I usually make that decision about chapter 4 if the book's really good and I'm getting a
yeah.
lot of depth, but I think I could get more. I add the
Oh,
audiobook into it because then
oh,
I'm
that's
getting it
cool.
multiple uh, sensory, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's cool. Yeah.
It,
Well, again,
it works.
thank you for honoring me with that. I think it's awesome.
Well, it's a great book, so I'll keep on keep on putting it out there for you.
Thanks, man.
Anyways, once again, thanks, Jeff. And by all means, we got to get together for a part 2,
Yeah.
and I'm going to see you in person one of these days.
I'll let you know when we're coming to Kansas City. There are incredible work happening. One of our survivor hunters, her name is Candace, absolute firecracker, just amazing woman. She lives in Kansas City. One of the cops that we work with, Lee, who's just beyond talented. So yeah, hopefully I see you before April. But if for some reason we're both getting pulled, let's make a point of meeting in Tampa for the next Skull Games Task Force event.
All right, it's a date.
All right.
You have just experienced the heat and pressure of the Forge. Remember, words without action are meaningless. Now, after the heat of the Forge, shape your thoughts, quench your brain, then put your new tools to use, adding to your leadership. Tune in next week for more lessons from the Forge.